Hello, my friends. So, going to take this opportunity to do a couple things here. I'll record this video for B-Day kids to watch, and then it'll serve as the review video for these slides as well. So, I'm going to go through the whole thing. My B-Day students, please watch the video and take notes. A-Day kids, we already did most of this in class together, so we'll just use this as a review later on. Anyways, we're transitioning into Unit 4. Unit 4 runs from 1800 to 1848. 1848, because we're discussing, the last real topic of Unit 4 is the Mexican-American War. So that's why Unit 4 ends where it does. You can see the overall ideas for Unit 4 here as well. The United States is going to go through a time period of expansion of power. The executive branch and the president are going to increase their power dramatically. A little bit under Thomas Jefferson, but a lot under Andrew Jackson. We're also going to expand territorially, like we see the Louisiana Purchase, the Mexican Cession, the annexation of Texas, and we eventually have our borders with Maine and Oregon settled in this unit as well. So by the end of this unit, the U.S. is going to have its borders established. We still expand outward later, like Alaska and Hawaii, and eventually, stuff from the Spanish-American War, like Puerto Rico. But anyways, by the end of this unit, we'll have the continental U.S. will be drawn. We also have divisions starting between the North, the South, and the West. We already saw some of that with like the Federalist versus Anti-Federalist, farmers versus merchant stuff, but that divide between the North and the South is going to get bigger, obviously because the Civil War rolls around in 1860. So by the end of this unit, we're only about a decade from the Civil War. So those issues between the North and the South and a little bit of the West are really going to come out because the U.S. is going to expand territory. The question is going to be, this new territory, should it be slave or should it be free? We also see changes to the U.S. economy and the market revolution. We're going to do a whole poster activity on that. And then, as always, we're following our marginalized groups. Our groups that still don't have full rights as citizens of the U.S. yet, such as women, slaves, freed slaves in Black America, Native Americans, and immigrant populations coming into the country. So really, I would get those down because those are our four big topics. Gabriel's Rebellion is something that you need to know. Gabriel's Rebellion, if you want to do it really quickly, is a slave rebellion that leads to increased slave law, harsher slave law, and on freed blacks as well, harsher laws in general. Pretty much from here on out, when you see rebellion, it's going to be a slave rebellion all the way up to the Civil War. So Gabriel's Rebellion is an example of that. And what you really need to know is it does increase the fear in the white Americans, the plantation owners, the slave owners in the South, which is going to then in turn increase the amount of restrictions on those slaves. So Gabriel's Rebellion does fail. His plan was to kidnap James Madison, who was the governor of Virginia at the time, eventually your fourth president, and hold him hostage essentially and demand freedom. Fails. So Gabriel's Rebellion is not successful, but it does, again, increase those slave laws and laws against slaves in general. Like, they can't meet in groups. They can't travel alone anymore. Well, in a lot of states, they can't travel alone. And there's harsher punishments for being a runaway. Anyways, looking at Thomas Jefferson's presidency, we're going to do a little Jefferson story time together. I'm not going to waste time on it in the video here because you're not asked about it, but we'll do that in class. B-Day kids, A-Day kids, we already did it. Jefferson's going to win the election of 1800. Remember, Adams is pretty unpopular because of the Alien and Sedition Acts. There's still some issues with France that we're going to have to tie up here in this slide presentation. But Adams loses the presidency mostly because of, again, the Alien and Sedition Acts. You can take a look at the Electoral College map. We did have a little bit of a weird result. Also would explain the Electoral College to the B-Day kids in class. Already did it for the A-Day kids. Just don't want to take all the time here because APUSH doesn't ask that much about it in Unit 4. But essentially, if you don't get to the number of required votes to win, it goes to the House of Representatives. So you can see here that Jefferson and Aaron Burr actually tie. If you look at the Federalists here between Adams and Pinckney, one Federalist voted for John Jay. The reason why is because the winner would become the president and the loser would become the vice president. That's how the system used to work. We changed the Electoral College, so now you run together. So you could, add amendments to change the Electoral College even today because we've done it in the past. But anyways, they end up tying Jefferson and Burr. Jefferson's clearly the one that they're trying to get to be president, so the House of Representatives breaks that tie and they pick Thomas Jefferson, which leads to the 12th Amendment. Probably not something you're going to get directly asked about, but would be a really good extra credit question. What's the 12th Amendment? The president and the vice president run together now. The loser does not become vice president. It would be the equivalent of Donald Trump being Joe Biden's vice president like today. or the loser of the Harris-Trump election becomes their vice president. We don't do that anymore because of the 12th Amendment. Anyways, Jefferson's win is also called the Revolution of 1800. The reason why is we see our first shift in power from one political party to the other. We no longer have an anti-federalist party. They're called the Democratic Republicans. The political parties do get very confusing, so we'll make sure we go over them, time and time again. But as long as you know basically who's the farmer party and who's the wealthy merchant party, that's really what you need to focus on, all the way up until, basically the Civil War. So we still have the Federalists for a little bit. They eventually die in the War of 1812, but the anti-federalists are now the Democratic Republicans. Anyways, we see our first shift in power. You have Adams and Washington, who were Washington's sort of a Federalist, but Adams is definitely a Federalist, to the Democratic Republicans. And nobody died. There was no rebellion, no revolt. Nobody got their head chopped off. That's actually kind of a big deal because previously in most regimes around the world, for you to change power, somebody dies. A king dies and passes power to his son, or there's a revolution and the leader gets their head chopped off and now there's another leader. We had a peaceful transition of power. That's why it's called the Revolution of 1800. So you do need to know it. It's a pretty easy term to remember. It's our first shift from one political party to another, and it was peaceful. There is a little controversy, not violent controversy, and that controversy is seen in Marbury versus Madison. Again, the story itself is not incredibly important, so we'll try to leave that out and just save that for class. But anyways, this is the first Supreme Court case you need to know, which is why it's called number 1 right there, star, 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 exclamation point. Have to know Marbury versus Madison. We did an extra credit podcast on it and everything. Basically, the rule here is that judicial review is going to become a thing. The power of the Supreme Court gets defined in Marbury versus Madison. So Marbury versus Madison equals the Supreme Court has the power of judicial review, which is the power to rule if laws are constitutional or not, and they have the ability to shoot down those laws if they're unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court in Marbury versus Madison gets the power of judicial review, which is the power to rule laws either constitutional or unconstitutional. Just a little Marshall's decision is outlined there. Jefferson wanted everybody to be farmers in his presidency, or just overall. Jefferson's vision for America was that we would be a farming-based economy, and the only way for you to actually be free is to grow your own food. Even today, if the grocery store is shut down or you couldn't order Uber Eats or something, would you be able to go outside and grow and hunt your own food? Probably not. It would be difficult for a lot of people. So Jefferson would argue you're not actually free if you're not, making your own food. So anyways, that's part of the reason why he buys Louisiana. This is a star, star, exclamation point as well. Look at all this room to farm is down there at the bottom of the slides. So his argument is this is going to give us enough land area to be able to make everybody in the country have their own little farms to be subsistence farmers. The ironic part here is that Jefferson's an anti-federalist or a Democratic Republican now. So he does not believe that the federal government should have a strong amount of power. In buying Louisiana, he did not ask Congress, meaning he increased the power of the federal government, of the executive, of the president. So it's a little bit of an ironic twist there that it's a really good deal. It's a smart decision. It goes against Jefferson's basic principle that the president shouldn't have that much power, but he needed to make the purchase. Napoleon needed the money quickly. It ended up being a really good decision because not only do we have all this room to farm, right, but we also buy the city of New Orleans, which is right at the bottom of the Mississippi River. We now have full control of the Mississippi River. So if I were giving you the ID term for Louisiana purchase, the U.S. purchases territory from France that dramatically increases the size of the United States, giving them full access to the Mississippi River. I know it's a little long, but it is significant. And look at that deal, 500 million acres for 3 cents an acre. It's the best buy we've ever made, right? And here's what it looks like, right? I know I skipped a slide here. There is some SAQ question that's what's the similarities of the Louisiana Purchase and the Northwest Land Ordinance? It's a very specific question. I doubt you'll actually see it on the real AP exam, but might be a question on your quiz or something. So there's the answer right there. Anyways, we bought this giant piece of land, which includes, again, Mississippi River and the city of New Orleans. So Jefferson, in the first government investment in science in American history, sends out Lewis and Clark to explore the area. It's called the Corps of Discovery. That would be another good extra credit question. If I said, hey, what's the expedition led by Lewis and Clark? What's it called? They're called the Corps of Discovery. Here's just a little, trace of their route and everything. So anyways, that's pretty much what's going on at home for the U.S. That's what I would say is the domestic response to things under Jefferson. We're now going to shift over to the foreign issues. So, as we had already said, the United States was dealing with respect issues around the world, like seen in the XYZ affair. Other countries are not really recognizing us as a power or as a sovereign nation, an independent nation. Again, we saw that in the XYZ affair. Another issue is that the U.S. is trying to trade like in the Mediterranean, as you can see on the map down there, like near Europe and North Africa. And there's these pirates. They're called, the Barbary pirates, right? They're up in the Barbary coast there on the map. And the U.S. is forced to pay them bribes in order to like keep their trading going. And we know how we feel about being asked to pay a bribe. So, anyways, Jefferson's pretty unhappy with this. So we fight a small war you've probably never heard of, the triple. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, the Barbary War, right, where the U.S. fights this small skirmish. However, again, Jefferson doesn't ask Congress for this power. You're supposed to ask Congress to declare war, but Jefferson essentially starts this mini war with these pirates without asking Congress, increasing the power of the president, right? So Jefferson, I know I give presidential grades. He gets a pretty strong B+ from me to a B. The Louisiana Purchase is definitely a really good idea. It really does. It's the best buy we've ever had. So he starts out in like a pretty high ranking for me. Here's the thing he did that was really dumb. That really takes him down. So first of all, he doesn't think the U.S. should be this giant mercantile economy. He thinks we should mostly be farmers, as we already said. So the British and the French are still impressing our soldiers, our ships. Remember that term from the Adams? But basically, they're capturing American ships and forcing us to be in servitude, right, for them and taking the goods that are on the ship. So they refuse to do that, which, again, is very disrespectful towards America. So Adams helps pass what's known as the Embargo Act of 1807, which says we don't trade with any country in the world. It's essentially Jefferson being upset with the French and the British, so he unplugs the video game system before he's going to leave. He's like, fine, we're not going to trade with anybody, right? Anyways, it completely cripples the U.S. economy. It shows that we can't just all be farmers. We're going to have some international trade. Jefferson also recognizes this, even though this is slightly after his presidency. So I guess the U.S. recognizes that this is a bad idea, and we start just trading with everybody except for Britain and France. But this is definitely the big issue with Jefferson, the Embargo Act. We cut off trade for the world. It really does show us that we can't just be farmers. The U.S. is going to have to trade with other countries. So why would he do that? Again, the impressment thing. He strongly believes in subsistence agriculture, which is, again, farming for like yourself just to eat. It does keep America somewhat neutral in issues around the world, I guess would be partially his argument. But this also really annoys the New England merchants. Again, he's a Democratic Republican. He's an anti-federalist, so most of his policies are going to annoy the New England merchants. But anyways, this really sets the stage for the War of 1812. Which we're going to get into here by the end of this video. And it is the first real increase in the sectional issues that are occurring between the North and the South. New England is going to be very upset with the Embargo Act, right? So anyways, Jefferson leaves the presidency. He leaves as a very popular president. As you can see, the Democratic Republicans, they run a guy named James Madison. Hey, remember that guy? Wrote the Constitution for president in 1808, and he wins in a landslide. He wins in a very large vote, but you see, he doesn't win New England. And he also, again, doesn't really win these areas that are like ports. Looking at American electoral college maps is very telling of what groups do what and who they're voting for. So people are pretty upset with the Embargo Act. The states that are most upset, the ones on the coast, they don't vote for it, Anyways, this leads us to the War of 1812. James Madison never had a son, but he fought the War of 1812. So anyways, British impressment, we already talked about that, is going to be a big cause of the War of 1812. The Embargo Act, the fact that countries in the world are really not respecting us in any way, we're like a neutral country and they're still impressing our ships, are really going to annoy us. And America, again, is really looking for respect on the world stage. So, the British keep capturing our ships and forcing our soldiers into servitude. We also have some issues, out in the area where we bought Louisiana, where the British are trying to bribe the natives to cause us issues and problems, which is really going to upset us. So anyways, we fight the War of 1812 with the British. It's a fairly boring war, except for a couple events. The British burned down the White House, which is definitely an interesting one. And also the Battle of New Orleans, which takes place a couple weeks after the war actually ends. which is, fairly hilarious to show you how, like, information travels. But really, the Battle of New Orleans is significant because it shows that Andrew Jackson is going to become like a famous person in American history. He wins this battle. He only loses a few guys to like 1,000 British guys. So it's seen as like an overwhelming victory for the U.S. So anyways, that's like a big deal, right? One of the big questions is the War of 1812 a second American Revolution? That gets asked a lot. Yes. It definitely is. The reason why is, again, this idea that the U.S. needs to be taken more seriously on the world stage, and the fact that we sort of tie with the British. There is no territorial change. I guess you could say we really win because we do get like international respect after this. Other countries don't. They stop impressing our ships. So, if that was the cause of the war, it stopped. So anyways, we also see a huge surge in nationalism, like the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner by Francis Scott Key. Great extra credit question, Francis Scott Key. Is written during the War of 1812. And again, is this idea of like national pride and national unity. So anyways, the fact that, we get together after the War of 1812, people stop recognizing themselves as like Virginians and North Carolinians and Connecticut whatevers. They start recognizing themselves as Americans. So that's a fairly big deal. It also shows the need that we need to have like economic change. We can't all just be farmers. We're going to need to go out there and like industrialize within the country itself. So it leads to the market revolution, which we're going to do posters on. It also leads to the death of the Federalist Party. The Federalists are mostly located up in New England, as we already talked about. They are really upset about the War of 1812 because we're not able to trade, and that's how they make most of their money. Jefferson's Embargo Act, and then we're fighting a war with the British. So it makes it difficult for New England trade to occur. They're really upset about this. They actually have a convention in Hartford where they almost call for the secession of New England from the U.S. So yes, New England threatened to secede. However, they have this Hartford convention, and very soon afterwards, the Treaty of Ghent is signed, which ends the War of 1812. So the Federalists look dumb, right? And the Federalist Party actually dies. They die. This leads to something called the Era of Good Feelings, which you definitely need to know. It's a time period in which there's only one major political party in the U.S., the Democratic Republicans. That's a big deal because you're going to see all of these laws and legislation that gets passed in something called the America System under Henry Clay. That's really going to show, this idea that the U.S. needs to modernize in its economy. And the reason why they're able to pass all those laws is because there's only one political party at the time. So the Era of Good Feelings is caused by the death of the Federalist Party, threatening to secede from the U.S. in the Hartford Convention because of the War of 1812, and then leads to legislation in the Market Revolution. So anyways, that's kind of all I wanted to do with you. There's some slides down here at the end that we'll cover in another video. This is just getting too long. It's 1B and 2B. Please watch this and take notes.